My name is Catherine Baker, and I'm 30 years old. By most measures, today should be the proudest day of my life. I'm sitting in a sea of red caps and gowns at Stanford University, about to receive my PhD in computer science after 6 grueling years of research, late nights, and more coffee than any human should consume. The May sun is beating down on 23,000 people packed into the stadium, and around me, my fellow graduates are taking selfies, texting family members, their faces glowing with excitement and relief. I should be glowing too, but instead, I'm staring at my phone, at a text message that just arrived from my mother. Catherine, your father and I have discussed it. After today, don't expect any help from us. You're 30 years old, and it's time you learn to stand on your own 2 feet. We're cutting off all financial support effective immediately. I felt my stomach drop as I read those words.
Even on my graduation day, a day that should have been about celebrating 6 years of groundbreaking research in artificial intelligence, my mother was finding a way to remind me that I was a disappointment, that I was irresponsible, that at 30 years old, I was still somehow failing at life. The truth was, I hadn't asked my parents for help in over 4 years, not $1. I'd been supporting myself entirely through research assistantships, teaching positions, and what my father dismissively called my computer hobby. But in their minds, I was still the irresponsible child who needed constant reminders about financial reality, about growing up, about facing the real world. A second text buzzed through, this time from my father. Your mother is right, Catherine. It's time to grow up and face the real world. We won't be bailing you out anymore. You've hidden in school long enough. Bailing me out? I wanted to laugh, but the hurt was too fresh. I hadn't asked them for money since my sophomore year of undergrad. In fact, the irony was almost painful. I'd been sending them money recently, small amounts when I knew they were struggling with bills. Always disguised as gifts or loans I insisted they didn't need to repay, but they didn't know that. They didn't know a lot of things about me. Catherine, you okay? Whispered Jessica Martinez, my friend sitting next to me. You look like someone just died. I showed her the texts. Her jaw literally dropped. On your graduation day? Seriously, what kind of parents do this at your PhD graduation? The kind who think I'm wasting my life, I said quietly, slipping my phone back into my pocket. According to my dad, getting a PhD in computer science was just an excuse to avoid getting a real job for 6 more years. To him, I'm 30 years old and still playing with computers like a teenager. Jessica shook her head in disbelief, but I could see families around us cheering and taking photos as graduates walked across the stage to receive their diplomas. I could see other parents in the stands beaming with pride as their children achieved this milestone. My parents were somewhere in the crowd, too, but apparently more concerned with teaching me life lessons than celebrating my accomplishment. What my parents didn't know, what almost nobody knew except my business partners, and a handful of people I trusted completely, was that their irresponsible daughter had been building something extraordinary, while they thought she was wasting time on unrealistic dreams. But they had no idea what was about to happen in the next 20 minutes. No idea at all. Tell me in the comments, have you ever been completely underestimated by your own family? Because I'm about to tell you how that underestimation became the biggest mistake my parents ever made. I need to take you back to understand how we got here, to this moment where my own mother chose my graduation day to tell me I was on my own, because this wasn't new. This was a pattern that had been building for decades. When I was 10 years old, I won first place at the state math competition. I remember running home with my trophy, so excited to show my parents. I burst through the door, and my father was on the phone with my older brother Daniel, who had just gotten accepted to business school. Dad barely glanced at my trophy before saying, "That's nice, sweetheart. Now let me finish talking to your brother about his real accomplishments." Real accomplishments. Even at 10, those words stung. When I was 16, I built my first computer from scratch and wrote a program that could solve complex equations faster than my graphing calculator. I tried to show my father how it worked, how the algorithms I'd created could revolutionize certain calculations. He patted me on the head and said, "Computers are a hobby, Catherine, not a career. Especially not for girls. You should focus on something more stable, more realistic." In college, when I told my parents I'd been accepted to Stanford's PhD program in computer science with a full scholarship, you'd think they would have been proud. Instead, my mother cried. Actually cried. She said, "Catherine, you're 24 years old. Your friends are getting married, starting families, building real lives. You're going to spend another 6 years in school? For what?" My father was more direct. "This is ridiculous. You have a bachelor's degree in computer science. That's enough. Get a job at some tech company, work for a few years, then settle down. Stop chasing these unrealistic dreams." But I went to Stanford anyway. And for 6 years, every holiday, every phone call, every family gathering became the same lecture. When are you going to finish? When are you going to get a real job? When are you going to stop playing with computers and face reality? Last Christmas, my brother Daniel came home. He works in middle management at a regional bank, makes a decent salary, has a wife and 2 kids. My parents spent the entire dinner talking about his promotion, his new house, his children's achievements. When I tried to mention that my research was being cited in major academic journals, that tech companies were reaching out about my work, my mother actually interrupted me. "Catherine, that's all very nice, but when are you going to have something tangible to show for all this time? Daniel has a real job, a real family, a real life. You're 30 years old and still living like a student." My father nodded in agreement. "Your mother's right. We're worried about you. This PhD has gone on long enough. It's time to stop hiding behind research and join the real world." Hiding. That's what they thought I was doing. Hiding from responsibility, from adulthood, from reality. 2 months ago, I invited them to my dissertation defense. 6 years of work, the culmination of everything I'd been building. A presentation of research that was genuinely groundbreaking in the field of artificial intelligence and facial recognition technology. My committee included some of the most respected researchers in the world. Tech companies had sent representatives to observe. It was a huge moment in my career. My parents didn't come. My mother said she had a hair appointment she couldn't reschedule. My father said he had a golf game with important clients. Daniel sent a text saying, "Congrats on finally finishing school, sis." They didn't understand. They didn't want to understand. In their minds, I was the family disappointment, the daughter who chose books over babies, research over reality, computers over common sense.
What they didn't know, what I'd been carefully keeping from them for 4 years, was that their irresponsible daughter had been building an empire while they thought she was wasting her life. It started in my second year of graduate school. I was working on algorithms for facial recognition and artificial intelligence when I realized my research had massive commercial applications. Not someday, not in theory, but right now. Security companies, social media platforms, law enforcement agencies, they all needed better AI systems, and I was developing technology that could revolutionize the entire field. So I did something terrifying. I took $50,000 from a research grant, found two partners from the business school who believed in my vision, and founded Spectrum Analytics. We started in a shared office space in Palo Alto. Just the three of us, working nights and weekends while I continued my PhD research during the day. I didn't tell my parents. Why would I? Every time I mentioned my work, they dismissed it. Every time I tried to share my excitement about computer science, they told me to be more realistic. So I stopped sharing. I stopped trying to make them understand. And I built something extraordinary in silence. By the end of year one, we had our first client, a small security company that paid us $30,000 to develop a custom recognition system. I remember the day that check arrived. I was sitting in my tiny studio apartment, eating ramen for the third night in a row, and I just stared at that check. $30,000 for work I loved doing, for algorithms I'd developed, for technology I believed in. I wanted to call my parents and tell them. Wanted to say, look, someone values my work. Someone sees potential in what I'm building. But I knew what they'd say. They'd tell me it was a fluke, that I was getting distracted from my studies, that I needed to focus on finishing my degree and getting a real job. So I deposited the check and said nothing. By the end of year two, we had offices in Palo Alto and 6 employees. Real employees with salaries and benefits. People who believed in our vision enough to leave stable jobs and take a chance on a startup run by a graduate student. I was managing a team, making payroll decisions, pitching to investors, all while maintaining my research schedule and teaching undergraduate courses. I was working 80-hour weeks, sleeping maybe 4 hours a night, living on coffee and determination. And my parents thought I was just studying. Year 3 was when everything accelerated. We secured our first Fortune 500 contract, a deal worth $3 million with a tech company whose products you probably use every day. The day we signed that contract, I sat in a conference room with executives who had decades more experience than me, and they treated my opinions with respect. They valued my expertise. They saw me as a leader, an innovator, someone building the future. That same week, I went home for Thanksgiving. My father spent the entire meal talking about how worried he was about my future, how I needed to start thinking practically about my career, how I couldn't hide in academia forever. I almost told him then. Almost said, "Dad, I just signed a $3 million contract. I'm running a company that's growing faster than I ever imagined. I'm not hiding from anything." But I didn't. Because I knew he wouldn't understand. Knew he'd find some way to diminish it, to worry about it, to tell me I was taking unnecessary risks. And all the while, my parents thought I was just a PhD student wasting my 30s on unrealistic dreams. The irony was almost funny. Almost. Because while they worried about my finances, while they sent those texts about cutting me off and teaching me responsibility, I was making more money than they'd ever seen. While they lectured me about facing reality, I was literally building the future. While they dismissed my computer hobby, that hobby was generating millions in revenue and employing hundreds of people. And here's the part that would have shocked them most if they'd known. For the past 2 years, I'd been secretly taking care of them financially. Not in huge, obvious ways that would have revealed my success, but in small, careful ways that made their lives easier without raising questions. Remember when my mother's car broke down last year and mysteriously, a gift card appeared in the mail that covered the entire repair? That was me. I'd had my assistant send it with no return address, just a note saying it was from a satisfied customer of the repair shop as part of a promotion. My mother had called me that day, so excited about her good luck. I'd listened to her talk about it, never letting on that her irresponsible daughter who couldn't manage money had just paid for her car. When my cousin Emma, who my parents adore, got a full scholarship to college from a foundation she'd never heard of, that was me. The Spectrum Analytics Educational Foundation, which I'd created and personally funded with $2 million. Emma had applied along with thousands of other students, but her essay about overcoming family doubts and pursuing STEM despite pressure to choose a more traditional path had resonated with me deeply. My mother had cried when Emma got that scholarship, had gone on and on about how proud she was, how this proved that dreams could come true. She had no idea her disappointing daughter had made it happen. When my father's beloved bowling league was about to shut down because they couldn't afford new equipment, and an anonymous donor saved them. Also me, my father had been devastated about potentially losing his Wednesday night bowling, the one thing he did just for himself. I'd donated $15,000 through a shell corporation, and he'd spent weeks trying to figure out who their mysterious benefactor was. He'd even joked once, "If only Catherine had a real job, maybe she could have helped us out." I'd smiled and said nothing. I'd been quietly, anonymously supporting my family for years. Not because they asked, not because they deserved it after how they treated me, but because I loved them. Because despite their constant criticism, despite their inability to see my worth, they were still my parents. But I never told them. I let them believe I was struggling, barely making ends meet on a graduate student stipend, because it was easier than constantly defending myself. Easier than trying to make them understand a world they'd already decided was a waste of time. The company grew. We secured contracts with major tech companies. Microsoft licensed our technology for $200 million. The Pentagon wanted our security systems. Universities were partnering with us for research. We had offices in Silicon Valley, Austin, and Boston. We were on track to become one of the most successful AI companies in the country. And my parents had no idea. 8 months ago, my CFO David Chen came to me with a proposal. "Catherine," he said, "we're ready. The company is stable, profitable, and growing faster than projected. It's time to take Spectrum Analytics public." An IPO. An initial public offering. Taking the company public meant selling shares on the stock market, meant becoming a publicly traded corporation, meant transforming from a private startup into a major player in the tech industry. It also meant my ownership stake. The 73% of the company I still held would suddenly have a very public, very specific dollar value. David laid out the projections. Conservative estimates put the company's value at around $5 billion.
Optimistic projections went as high as $7 billion. Either way, my personal stake would be worth billions with a B. I sat in that meeting looking at the numbers and thought about my parents. Thought about every lecture about financial responsibility. Every comment about my unrealistic dreams. Every reminder that I needed to grow up and face reality. "When would the IPO happen?" I asked David. He checked his calendar. "If we start the process now, file the paperwork, do the roadshow to investors, we're looking at early May. May graduation month." "Can you target a specific day?" I asked. David looked confused. "I mean, we can request a date. Why?" "I graduate May 23rd, I said. "I want the IPO to launch on my graduation day." He stared at me for a long moment, then slowly smiled. "That's poetic justice if I've ever heard it." "My parents are attending graduation," I said quietly. "They think it's the end of 6 wasted years. They've been pushing me to finally grow up and get a real job. I think it's time they learned what I've really been doing." David laughed. "Catherine, when that IPO launches, every news outlet in the country is going to be covering it. Spectrum Analytics is going to be huge. You're going to be famous. Are you ready for that?" Was I ready? I didn't know, but I knew I was tired of hiding my success to protect my parents' feelings, tired of being treated like a failure when I was anything but, tired of watching them dismiss everything I'd accomplished because it didn't look the way they thought success should look. "Set the date," I told David. "Let's launch on graduation day." So that's how I ended up sitting in Stanford Stadium on May 23rd, in my red graduation gown, with my parents somewhere in the crowd, having just received a text telling me they were cutting me off financially because I needed to learn to stand on my own 2 feet. The irony was about to become very, very public. The ceremony continued around me as I tried to process my mother's text. The announcer was calling names, graduates were walking across the stage to collect their diplomas, and families were cheering.
It was supposed to be a celebration. Instead, I was sitting there feeling the familiar weight of my parents' disappointment pressing down on me like a physical thing. "Dr. Catherine Baker," the announcer finally called, and I realized it was my turn. I stood up, my legs feeling shaky, and walked toward the stage. My hands were trembling slightly as I shook hands with the dean and accepted my diploma. 6 years of work, 6 years of 60-hour weeks, of late nights in the lab, of research that had been cited in dozens of academic papers and was being used by major tech companies. 6 years of building not just a dissertation, but an entire company that was about to change the world. And my parents thought I was irresponsible. As I walked back to my seat, my phone rang. The caller ID showed David Chen, CFO. I almost declined the call. David knew I was at graduation. He knew this was supposed to be my day off from company business. He wouldn't call unless it was urgent, unless it was about the IPO. My heart started pounding as I answered, keeping my voice low. "David, I'm literally at my graduation ceremony right now." "Catherine, I'm so sorry to interrupt." His voice was practically vibrating with excitement. "But I have news that absolutely couldn't wait." I could hear the smile in his voice, hear the barely contained energy, and suddenly I knew. "It launched? 15 minutes ago. Catherine, we priced at $28 per share, which was already above our target range. But the market response." He paused for dramatic effect. "We opened at $47 and we're currently trading at 52. The company is valued at $6.2 billion. The words hit me like a physical blow. $6.2 billion. I owned 73% of Spectrum Analytics, which meant my personal stake was worth approximately $4.5 billion. I'd just become a billionaire. During my graduation ceremony. "Catherine, are you there?" David's voice pulled me back to reality. "You just became a multi-billionaire. Do you understand what I'm saying?" I was so shocked that I forgot to lower my voice. "Are you serious? 6.2 billion?" Several graduates around me turned to stare. Jessica's eyes went wide. The words billion and IPO had a way of cutting through graduation ceremony chatter like a knife through butter. "Dead serious," David continued. "The Wall Street Journal is calling it the most successful tech IPO in 5 years. CNBC wants an interview this afternoon. Bloomberg is running a feature on you as the youngest self-made female billionaire in tech. Catherine, you did it. You actually did it." I was trying to process this information while simultaneously realizing that more and more people around me were listening. The words billion and IPO were apparently magnetic. "David," I said, my voice shaking slightly, "I'm surrounded by people right now. Can we talk about this later?" Of course," But Catherine, there's one more thing. He paused. Goldman Sachs is already predicting the stock will hit $65 by the end of the week. If they're right, we're looking at a valuation of $7.8 billion. Your stake would be worth over $5 billion. My hands were shaking as I tried to absorb this information. $5 billion. I'd gone from graduate student to billionaire in the time it took to walk across a stage and collect a diploma. We'll talk later, I managed to say. Thank you, David. Thank you for everything. I hung up and immediately felt Jessica grab my arm. Did he just say billion with a B? I nodded, still in shock. The company went public this morning. I didn't think. I mean, I knew it was today, but I didn't realize it would happen during the ceremony. Around us, other graduates were openly staring now. The news was spreading through our section like wildfire, whispered conversations about IPO and billion and tech company rippling outward from where I sat. That's when I saw them, my parents, making their way down the stadium steps toward the graduate seating area. My mother was clutching her purse tightly, her face set in that stern expression she wore when she was about to deliver a lecture. My father was checking his phone, probably preparing to send another message about my need to become financially responsible. They were coming to deliver more life lessons, coming to make sure I understood that their decision to cut me off was for my own good, that I needed to finally grow up and face reality. They had no idea what was about to happen. My phone rang again. This time it was Maria Santos, our head of public relations. I looked at my parents approaching, looked at the phone, and made a decision. I was done hiding, done protecting their feelings while they dismissed mine, done letting them believe I was a failure when I was anything but. I answered the phone. Maria, this probably isn't a great time. Catherine, I know, and I'm so sorry to call during graduation, but this is huge. Massive. The IPO is already making headlines everywhere. I have interview requests from every major business publication in the country. The Today Show wants you on tomorrow morning. Fortune is fast-tracking a cover story for their next issue. My parents were getting closer now, close enough that if I put the phone on speaker, they'd hear everything. Part of me, the dutiful daughter who'd spent 30 years trying to earn their approval, wanted to hang up and avoid the confrontation. But another part of me, the part that had been dismissed and underestimated and criticized for years, decided it was time they heard the truth. I put the call on speaker. Maria, I'm sorry. Can you repeat that? I want to make sure I heard the numbers correctly. There was a pause on the other end, and I could almost hear Maria's confusion about why I was asking her to repeat information. But she was a professional. Of course. Spectrum Analytics went public this morning at a valuation of $6.2 billion. Your 73% stake makes you worth approximately $4.5 billion. The IPO is being called one of the most successful tech launches in recent history. The graduates around me had gone completely silent now. Even families nearby had stopped their conversations to listen to this surreal phone call happening in the middle of a graduation ceremony. My parents reached my row just as Maria continued. The facial recognition algorithms you developed are being called a breakthrough in artificial intelligence. The Pentagon contract alone is worth $400 million. Microsoft just licensed your technology for $200 million, and we have deals pending with Apple, Amazon, and Facebook. My father's face went completely white. The phone he'd been holding slipped from his hand and clattered onto the concrete steps. The story is already trending on social media, Maria went on. Stanford PhD becomes billionaire on graduation day is the top headline on every business website. You're about to become one of the most famous entrepreneurs in America. My mother made a small choking sound. Also, Maria added, the university just confirmed they're planning to name the new computer science building after you. The $100 million donation you committed will fund scholarships for underprivileged students for the next 50 years. I could see my mother's knees actually buckle slightly. My father reached out to steady her, his face cycling through expressions I couldn't identify. Shock, disbelief, confusion, maybe something that looked like shame. "Maria, thank you for the update," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "Let's schedule a proper meeting tomorrow to discuss the media strategy." "Absolutely. And Catherine, congratulations. You've built something incredible, something that's going to change the world." I hung up the phone and looked at my parents, who were standing frozen in the aisle like someone had pressed pause on their lives. "Hi, Mom." "Hi, Dad," I said quietly. "I got your text about not expecting help anymore." The noise of the graduation ceremony continued around us, but our little section had become its own bubble of shocked silence. Other families were openly staring now, phones out, probably recording this family drama that was unfolding in real time. Some of them were likely already Googling my name, finding the news articles about the IPO that were apparently flooding the internet. But I only cared about the two people standing in front of me, looking like their entire understanding of reality had just been shattered. "Catherine." My father finally managed to speak, his voice barely above a whisper. "What just happened? What was that phone call?" "I became a billionaire," I said simply, my voice calm despite the adrenaline coursing through my system. "The company I founded went public this morning. Spectrum Analytics develops artificial intelligence systems for facial recognition, security platforms, and social media applications." "But you're a student," my mother said weakly, her hand still clutched to her chest. "You're getting your PhD. You don't have a company. You've been in school." "I have both," I replied. "I founded Spectrum Analytics in my second year of graduate school, 4 years ago. We started with a $50,000 research grant and grew from there. The artificial intelligence algorithms I developed for my dissertation became the foundation for our core products." Jessica leaned over from her seat, her voice filled with wonder. "Catherine, you never told any of us you owned a company. How did you keep this quiet for 4 years?" "I don't really talk about it," I said, still watching my parents' faces. "I preferred to focus on my research and let the business team handle operations. But we've been growing steadily. We have offices in Silicon Valley, Austin, and Boston. About 300 employees as of last month." 300 employees, my father repeated, like he was trying to make the words make sense. He sat down heavily on the concrete steps, his face pale. 300 people work for you?" "As of last month, yes. We've been hiring aggressively to keep up with demand. The AI revolution is happening faster than anyone expected, and our technology is considered industry-leading." I pulled out my phone, opened the Spectrum Analytics website, and handed it to my mother. The homepage featured a prominent banner announcing the IPO success, complete with real-time stock prices that were still climbing. "The Pentagon contract Maria mentioned is for next-generation security systems," I explained as my mother stared at the screen. "The Microsoft deal integrates our facial recognition technology into their cloud services. We also have partnerships with Stanford, MIT, and Carnegie Mellon to fund AI research labs." My mother's hands were shaking as she held my phone. "Catherine, if you have all this money, all this success, why didn't you tell us? Why did you let us think you were just a struggling student?" It was the question I'd been dreading, but also the one I'd been waiting years to answer. "Because every single time I tried to tell you about my work, you dismissed it as a waste of time," I said gently but firmly. "Remember Christmas 2 years ago when I tried to explain machine learning algorithms? Dad told me to stop talking nonsense and focus on finding a husband." My father winced like I'd physically struck him. "Or last Thanksgiving when I mentioned that tech companies were reaching out about my research? Mom, you said I was living in a fantasy world and needed to prepare for the real job market." My mother's eyes filled with tears. I stopped trying to share my successes with you because you'd already decided I was irresponsible, that I was wasting my life, that getting a PhD was just an excuse to avoid growing up. It was easier to let you believe what you wanted to believe than to constantly defend myself against your disappointment. A graduate sitting behind us tapped my shoulder hesitantly. "Excuse me, I'm sorry to interrupt, but are you really worth $4.5 billion? I nodded. As of about half an hour ago, yes. "Dude," he breathed, pulling out his phone. "Your IPO is all over Twitter. They're calling you the youngest self-made female billionaire in tech history. This is insane." More people were pulling out their phones now, the murmur of conversation growing as strangers realized they were sitting next to someone who had just made financial history. I could see the exact moment when people found the news articles, their eyes widening, heads turning to stare at me with a mixture of awe and disbelief. But I kept my focus on my parents. "Dad," I said, "you texted me this morning saying I need to learn to stand on my own 2 feet. I've been standing on my own feet for 4 years. I've been running a company, managing 300 employees, securing contracts with some of the biggest tech companies in the world, and conducting research that's advancing the entire field of artificial intelligence." I stood up, my graduation gown billowing slightly in the breeze. Around us, the ceremony was still continuing, but our section had become a spectacle of its own. "You said I was wasting my time getting a PhD instead of getting a real job. This PhD isn't just a piece of paper. It's the foundation of technology that's going to change how computers understand and interact with the world. The research I've been doing isn't theoretical anymore. It's being implemented by companies with billions of users." The ceremony announcer's voice echoed through the stadium, calling more names, but people in our section weren't paying attention to the stage anymore. They were paying attention to us, to this drama unfolding in real time, some recording on their phones, probably already uploading to social media. But most importantly," I continued, my voice steady despite the emotion threatening to break through, "you told me this morning not to expect help from you anymore because it was time I learned to be financially responsible. That's fine, because I haven't needed your help in years. In fact, I've been helping you." I pulled up my banking app, the one connected to my personal accounts that showed years of transactions. I turned the screen toward them. "The mysterious gift card that paid for Mom's car repairs last year? That was me. The full scholarship that covered Cousin Emma's college tuition from a foundation she'd never heard of? That's the Spectrum Analytics Educational Foundation, which I personally fund. The anonymous donation that saved Dad's bowling league when they couldn't afford new equipment? Also me." My father stared at the screen, his face cycling through a dozen different expressions. My mother had started crying openly, tears streaming down her face. "I've been quietly taking care of this family for 2 years," I said. "Not because you asked me to, but because I love you. Because despite your constant criticism of my choices, despite your inability to see my worth, you're still my parents. But I did it anonymously because I knew if you found out the money was coming from your irresponsible daughter who was wasting her life on computers, you'd refuse it." "Catherine," my mother whispered, her voice breaking. "We didn't know. We thought we were helping you by pushing you to be more realistic, more practical." "I understand why you worried," I replied. "But you never asked about my actual situation. You never tried to understand what I was actually doing. You assumed I was failing because my path didn't look like what you expected success to look like." A woman in a press credential was making her way through the crowd now, a camera operator following close behind. I realized we were about to have an audience that was much bigger than just the graduates around us. "Mom, Dad, we need to finish this conversation somewhere private," I said urgently. "We're about to be surrounded by media, and I don't think you want this discussion happening on camera." My father looked around and seemed to notice for the first time that we'd attracted considerable attention. Graduates and families were openly staring, dozens of phones were recording, and there was definitely a news crew approaching fast. "Catherine," he said quietly, his voice thick with emotion, "I owe you an apology. We owe you the biggest apology. We've been so incredibly wrong about everything." "We can talk about it later," I said, but even as the words left my mouth, I knew it was too late. The reporter reached us, microphone extended, camera light glowing red. "Catherine Baker? I'm Jennifer Walsh from CNBC. Congratulations on the IPO success. Can you tell us how it feels to become a billionaire on your graduation day?" Cameras were rolling, phones were recording. My parents were standing there looking completely overwhelmed by the sudden media attention, and I had a choice to make: protect their dignity or tell the truth. I chose something in between. "It feels surreal," I said honestly. 6 years ago, I came to Stanford to pursue research in artificial intelligence. I never expected it would lead to this level of commercial success. "What's next for Spectrum Analytics?" Jennifer asked, the camera focusing tightly on my face. "We're focused on expanding our research partnerships with universities and continuing our work in ethical AI development. The goal has always been to create technology that benefits society, not just generate profits." "And your parents?" Jennifer turned the camera slightly toward my mother and father, who both looked like they wanted the ground to swallow them. "They must be incredibly proud of your success." I looked at my parents, at the shock and shame and confusion written across their faces. I could have told the truth. Could have said they'd spent graduation morning cutting me off financially, telling me to grow up, dismissing 6 years of groundbreaking work. But that would have been cruel. And despite everything, I wasn't cruel. "My parents have always supported my education," I said carefully. "Even when they didn't fully understand my career path, I'm grateful for the foundation they gave me. It was diplomatic. It was protective. It acknowledged the complicated truth without humiliating them publicly." Jennifer asked a few more questions about the company, about my plans, about the technology we were developing. But security was already moving through the crowd, trying to create a path to get us away from the growing media presence. As we walked away from the cameras, my father finally spoke again. "Catherine, I need you to know something. I'm proud of you. I'm so incredibly proud I don't even have words for it, and I'm ashamed of myself for not seeing what you were building, for not believing in you when you needed me to." "Dad," I started, but he held up his hand. "Please, let me say this. I thought I was protecting you by pushing you toward what I saw as stability. But you were already building something more stable than anything I ever imagined. You were building the future, and I was too blind to see it." We reached a quiet area away from the crowds, under some trees where security had created a barrier. For the first time since the phone calls, we had privacy. "I'm sorry," he continued, his voice breaking. "I'm sorry for the text this morning. I'm sorry for years of making you feel like your dreams weren't valid, like your work wasn't real. I'm sorry for not trusting you to know what was best for your own life." My mother stepped forward and wrapped her arms around me. She was crying hard now, her whole body shaking. "We're so proud of you, sweetheart. And we're so sorry we made you feel like you had to hide your success from us. So sorry we couldn't see what you were accomplishing." I hugged her back, feeling my own tears starting to fall. "I didn't have to hide it," I said. "I chose to because I wanted to focus on the work rather than the money. But I should have tried harder to help you understand what I was doing." "What you were doing," my father said, "was changing the world, and we were too busy worrying about conventional success to see it." My phone buzzed with another call from David. The financial world was apparently moving fast today. "I should take this," I said, pulling back from my mother's embrace. "David, what's the update?" Catherine, we just crossed 7 billion in market cap. And there's something else. Goldman Sachs wants to discuss a secondary offering that could value the company at $10 billion within 6 months. I looked at my parents, who were listening with expressions that were equal parts wonder, pride, and disbelief. Also, David continued, the White House just called. They want to discuss you joining a presidential advisory committee on artificial intelligence and national competitiveness. The president personally requested you for the committee. Apparently, your work is considered essential to maintaining America's technological leadership. The White House, I repeated, watching my father's eyes widen. The actual White House? The actual White House. They want to meet next week if you're available. I hung up and looked at my parents. So, I said with a slight smile, I guess I should update my resume. My father laughed. Actually laughed, for the first time since he'd arrived at graduation. I think your resume is probably fine, but Catherine, I want you to know something. Whether you were worth $4 or $4 billion, you're still my daughter, and I love you. I love you too, Dad. Both of you. And despite what happened this morning, I'm glad you're here for my graduation. We wouldn't have missed it for the world, my mother said, wiping her eyes. Even if we didn't understand until now just how significant today really was. As we walked back toward the graduation ceremony, which was wrapping up now, I realized something important. Becoming a billionaire wasn't the most significant thing that had happened today. The most important thing was that my parents finally understood who I really was, what I'd been building, and that despite years of misunderstandings and dismissiveness, our family was still intact. Different, maybe. Forever changed by this revelation, but intact. My phone buzzed with a text from Jessica. Your IPO is the #1 trending topic on Twitter. Also, can I get your autograph? I want to tell people I graduated with a billionaire. I laughed and showed the text to my parents. I guess our daughter is famous now, my mother said, her voice still shaky but carrying a hint of pride. She always was, my father replied, putting his arm around her shoulders. We just didn't know it yet. The next few hours were a blur. More interviews, more photos, graduates wanting selfies with me, faculty members congratulating me on both the PhD and the company. My phone never stopped buzzing with calls, texts, emails from investors, media outlets, business leaders, and friends I hadn't heard from in years. But through it all, my parents stayed close. They listened as I explained the technology to reporters. They watched as I fielded calls from business partners. They saw, maybe for the first time, who I actually was beyond their expectations and assumptions. That evening, as the sun set over Stanford campus, I finally had a moment to breathe. I was sitting in my small apartment, the one I'd probably be moving out of soon, surrounded by boxes of research papers and my dissertation materials. My phone buzzed with a text from my father. Proud of you, kiddo. Always have been, even when I was too stubborn to show it properly. Love you. I smiled and texted back. Love you too, Dad. My mother sent a message too. Your grandmother would have been so proud. She always said you were going to do something extraordinary. I'm sorry I didn't listen to her. I'm sorry I didn't listen to you. Tomorrow, I would start navigating my new life as a public figure, as a billionaire CEO, as someone whose face would be on magazine covers and business news shows. Tomorrow, I would deal with the media requests, the investment opportunities, the speaking engagements, and all the complications that came with sudden, massive wealth and fame. But tonight, I was just Catherine Baker, a daughter who had finally proven to her parents that dreams were worth pursuing, even when those dreams looked different from what everyone expected. 1 year later, everything had changed. Spectrum Analytics was now valued at $10 billion, just as Goldman Sachs had predicted. The stock had stabilized at a healthy price, the company was growing steadily, and our technology was being used by governments, corporations, and research institutions around the world. I'd been featured on the cover of Fortune magazine's 40 Under 40 list. Forbes had ranked me as one of the most influential entrepreneurs in America. Time had included me in their Next Generation Leaders feature. And yes, I'd joined the Presidential Advisory Committee on Artificial Intelligence, spending 1 week every month in Washington helping shape national policy on technology and innovation. But more importantly, my relationship with my parents had transformed completely. They came to my Fortune Award ceremony, sitting in the front row, beaming with genuine pride. My father had tears in his eyes when I gave my acceptance speech about believing in yourself even when others doubt you. My mother had started volunteering with the Spectrum Analytics Educational Foundation, helping distribute scholarships to young women pursuing STEM degrees. She told me once, with tears in her eyes, that she wanted to make sure no other young woman felt dismissed the way she'd dismissed me. My father had become my biggest champion, boring his golf buddies with stories about my work, showing everyone the articles written about me, proudly explaining artificial intelligence algorithms he barely understood but had made an effort to learn about. They asked questions now. Real questions about my work, my company, my research. They listened when I talked about new projects. They celebrated my victories and supported me through challenges. They'd become the parents I'd always wanted them to be. Was I still hurt by those years of dismissal? Sometimes. The wounds didn't heal overnight. But I was learning to forgive, to understand that they genuinely thought they were protecting me, even if their methods were painful and their assumptions wrong. Today was special. I was standing at the dedication ceremony for the new Stanford Computer Science Building, the Catherine Baker Hall of Computing. My $100 million donation had funded not just the building but established endowments for scholarships, research grants, and programs to encourage underprivileged students to pursue careers in technology. The building would house state-of-the-art research labs, teaching spaces, and innovation centers. The crowd was huge: students, faculty, tech industry leaders, media, government officials. But I was focused on two people sitting in the front row: my parents. My mother was crying happy tears. My father was taking photos, probably planning to send them to everyone he knew. As I stepped up to the microphone to give my speech, I thought about that graduation day 18 months ago. About sitting in my cap and gown, reading a text that told me I was irresponsible and needed to grow up. About becoming a billionaire while my parents listened in shock. About watching their entire perception of me shatter and rebuild in the space of an hour. Thank you all for being here today, I began, my voice carrying across the crowd. This building represents more than just a donation or a naming opportunity. It represents the idea that success doesn't always look the way we expect it to. I glanced at my parents. When I started at Stanford 6 years ago, a lot of people thought I was making a mistake. They thought I should pursue more conventional paths, more realistic goals. They worried I was wasting my time on dreams that would never pay off. My father nodded slightly, acknowledging the truth of those words. But I learned something important during those 6 years. I learned that the people who change the world are usually the ones who refuse to listen when others say their dreams are impossible. I learned that believing in yourself matters more than having others believe in you, though both are wonderful when you can have them. My mother smiled through her tears. I also learned that people can change, that understanding can grow, and that love survives even when communication fails. This building is dedicated not just to the future of computing, but to every student who's been told their dreams are unrealistic, their passions impractical, their ambitions too big. I looked out at the crowd, at the young faces in the audience who reminded me of myself 6 years ago. To those students, I say this: The best revenge against those who doubt you isn't proving them wrong with anger or bitterness. The best revenge is building something so extraordinary, so undeniable, that everyone has to see your worth. And then, if you choose, you can offer them the grace to grow alongside you. The crowd applauded. My parents stood up, clapping harder than anyone. After the ceremony, we gathered for photos in front of the building. Me, my parents, university officials, members of my team from Spectrum Analytics. At one point, a photographer asked my parents to stand on either side of me in front of the building bearing my name. "How does it feel?" the photographer asked them. "To have a daughter with a building named after her?" My father smiled, his arm around my shoulders. "It feels like we should have listened better all along, but we're grateful she gave us the chance to learn." My mother squeezed my hand. She taught us that success comes in many forms, and the most important thing we can do as parents is support our children's dreams, even when we don't understand them. As the sun set over the campus, casting golden light across the building that now bore my name, I thought about how far I'd come. Not just financially or professionally, but personally. I'd learned that my worth wasn't defined by my parents' approval, though having it felt wonderful. I'd learned that the most satisfying victories are the ones where everyone ends up better than they started. I'd learned that revenge doesn't have to be cruel to be sweet. My phone buzzed with a text from my father. "Dinner tonight? Your mother and I want to hear about your new project. We promise to actually listen this time." I smiled and texted back, "I'd love that." Because here's what I'd learned most of all. Sometimes the people who hurt us most are capable of the greatest growth. Sometimes families can rebuild on stronger foundations after everything falls apart. Sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all, it's grace. And sometimes, just sometimes, the daughter they underestimated becomes the woman who shows them what unconditional love really looks like. Have you ever been underestimated by the people who should have believed in you most? Drop a comment about how you proved them wrong, or how you're still working on it. Sometimes our families need time to see our worth. Sometimes they never do. Either way, your success is yours to define, and nobody else gets to write your story but you. Hit subscribe if you believe in building your own path, and let me know in the comments. Should I have told my parents about Spectrum Analytics sooner, or did they need to learn this lesson the hard way? Because I think we all know the answer to that one. The best revenge isn't about destroying the people who doubted you. It's about building something so undeniable that everyone has to see your worth, and then having the grace to bring them along for the journey, if they're willing to grow. That's real power. That's real success. And that's real family, rebuilt on a foundation of mutual respect instead of assumptions and disappointment. I'm Catherine Baker, PhD, founder and CEO of Spectrum Analytics. And this is how I became a billionaire on the day my parents told me to grow up.